I think we are given chances to do amazing things, and sometimes we don't know it. Like sometimes we don't realize the impact we can have. And sometimes it's clear, it's right in front of us, like, wow, if I connect David to his unit, that's going to be very meaningful for David. Sometimes it's so clear.
hmm
Usually it's not that clear.
Hi, welcome to the Doctor's Den. Today I have Akiva Harow with me. Akiva is a clinical social worker. He's a manager of Beit Daniela's new southern branch and has a private practice working primarily with teens and young adults. But the reason that I've brought him on today is because he is a reserve casualty officer. I think I got that right this time. Akiva, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Really excited to be here today.
The reason we've come together today, and I'm really glad that you chose today as the day for us to do this, is that it is Yom HaHokara. It's the Israeli Veterans Recognition Day. And as a casualty officer, there are some casualty officers whose responsibility is to be in touch with wounded warriors and disabled veterans. But before we dive into that, can you give me a little bit about your own story? How did you get into the army? What did you do in the army as in your first round, and then how did you become a casualty officer? How did that happen?
Good question. Interesting question, because I did not start in the casualty officer field. I actually started in the armed corps and tanks. 1998, August 98 is when I drafted, and I was part of the Hesder unit. The Shiva guys go together as a group, and we joined the Shiryan, the 401 Brigade. I think it's a brigade, right? Um, in any case, in any case, we joined, and I did Shiryan, which is tanks, for my years of service. And then afterwards, when I was in reserve duty, I also continued for another like 7, 8 years. And the tanks we were in were so old that they dismantled the whole unit, and a bunch of us were let go.
Oh wow! Like oh my gosh! Like I can't imagine like you doing this and you suddenly go, wait, what do you mean you're letting me go? What am I supposed to
So
do
it
now?
was really funny because I mean, in what's it called, subscription service, it was
Yeah.
already out. It was already out for a
Right.
while, and then they got the Merkaba tanks, and they've been using that
Mhm.
primarily. And then when they had enough tanks, they don't no longer wanted to use the M60, which is a 1960 model that the Americans sold the Israelis. So we're in the 21st century. It's time to move on. We had a lot of new technologies that Israel added to the tank, but it was overdue, I guess. They wanted something much better. I found myself without reserve duty, and my wife was appreciative, and my kids, they got their daddy home more frequently.
hmm
But then what happened was, while I was in my master's studies for social work, one of my classmates showed up in his uniform, but not the usual reserve duty uniform, which they call a day bet, which is like the B uniform, which is used for when you're
hmm
getting dirty and sweaty, and it's what I'm wearing right now. But he came on with the Aleph uniform, which is more the ceremonial uniform. And that really surprised me. Like, here's a guy who's finished the army, he's walking around like that. And I asked him, what's the story? And he said that he's a casualty officer in reserve duty. I said, wow, that's so interesting. I'm not doing reserve duty now. Maybe I can join. Do they need new soldiers? And he spoke to his officer, and she said yes. And that's history. So that was 13 years ago. At the time, interestingly enough, at the time, I went for my first day there in a training, that the head officer of the northern region at the time, like a general, spoke to us about what it means to be a casualty officer, and he said the day will come soon enough that Syria and Lebanon and our enemies, God forbid, will attack us, and we won't have enough casualty officers. So we need you reserve soldiers to be trained for an emergency situation. And that was 13 years ago. And it sounded far fetched to me that that's going to be the case. They were describing it as another Yom Kippur, where the cemeteries were just packed with people all day long, day after day. And it just felt like a scene out of a movie when he said that. It just didn't. It did. I couldn't process it. I couldn't really believe it. I hoped it would never happen, and I was never called for that duty. What I really did for the last 13 years was before the holidays, before Rosh Hashanah, and before Pesach. We'd have 2 weeks of visiting families of bereaved families, soldiers that have fallen, and also, like I mentioned to you earlier, that also disabled veterans. And so why was I saying that? Because I wanted to mention that October 7th came, and it was my first time I was called up for that tragic reserve, situation where they needed everybody on deck. And till then, I did not work with new cases. Today, when I get a new family, it's a family that lost their loved one. There's their soldier member of the family. A week after the funeral, that's when I step in. I change places with the person that notified the family. We meet together at the cemetery, and we meet the family or at home, and we kind of pass the baton. Um,
I have there's so many questions. I want to start. You mentioned October 7th. I would love to take just a moment. Just like I'm gonna even put on a timer. We're gonna do like a minute just for them, if you don't mind, because there's so many people who've died, so many people who've gotten hurt, so many people who are still hostages. That taking a minute for them seems appropriate. So I'm gonna pop a timer on, which sounds kind of weird, but it'll give us a thing, and we're just gonna go 1 whole minute. Let's see if I can do that. Can I do a popper timer? Okay. Wow. Just a minute thinking about that. I can't even imagine what the training was like when you said I had to train to be prepared for that kind of mass casualty event. On the one hand, I gotta imagine going back to Middleman, especially doing something so honorable and so deeply impactful to others was amazing. But what was it like learning about that possibility, and what is it they taught you to do?
there's a bunch of different things. One is really they even hired. There was even a moment. It was a course for like a week, and there I don't remember now. It's 13 years already. I think it was at least a few days, full days, if
Mm-hmm.
not a full week. And there was even a moment where they hired actors so we can do simulations. You walk into a house
Wow.
and the family members extremely angry at the army, and they're blaming the army for scandal and mistakes, and you come in and and that's what happened with me. He was blasting me. And he was, the actor was yelling at me, and the wife was in her shell and like couldn't come out. And they're both actors. It felt so real. Now that was an example of something to practice.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we practicing, right? We're practicing on the one hand, whether it's disarming a complex situation like that, and focusing on really being that representative of the army, that is still noble and respectful and caring and kind and empathetic, while also being professional and serious, and our job is extremely sensitive, because on the one hand, I'm coming in as a representative of the army. I'm on uniform. I belong to the army. They're the ones that sent me. I want I want the army's interests. It's at my heart also. I want the families. Whatever the army did, I want to do it right. I want to pass on any information that needs to be passed on that the army asked me to pass on, or anything that needs to be said, or any objects that need to be shared. But I also want the family's best interests at heart. Like I'm representing the families to the army, and I'm representing the army to the families. I'm like a middleman who helps mediate that communication. So there's a lot to learn about that. There's also learning, just meeting bereaved family members, or disabled veterans who came and spoke about their experience with casualty officers and what they needed from them. There was also a lot about the procedures, the technical procedures of what happens, when it happens, how it happens, what's the right way to carry it out, different cultural sensitivities. How do you work with the Bedouin community, with different minorities, and religion, no
Wow.
religion. Lots of different aspects that need to be addressed.
Yeah. Now I know casualty officers, they have two main responsibilities, right? And you happen to right now be doing this work specifically with the what we call mishpachot shekulot, the families which have lost a loved one since October 7th. Um, but for a while you were also visiting disabled and wounded veterans. What was that like for you as part of your service?
There's something sacred in Israeli society when it comes to veterans in general, disabled veterans and casualties of war. Um, Remembrance Day, is that how you say Yom HaZikaron in English?
Yeah.
Is a sacred day in Israel. And there's almost this unique pride, right? I'm very, very proud of my military service in the armed corps and working with tanks and knowing that, I'm a combat soldier. I trained
Mm-hmm.
to be in war. And as much as I joke now that I'm a jobnik, now I'm not a real soldier, I'm just a casualty officer. On the one hand, that's true. I really do feel that I'm the one that, 6 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., whatever it is, I come home at night, right? I'm not out in Gaza or Lebanon fighting a war, risking my life. And that I do feel I'm kind of missing. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sacrificing the way others are sacrificing. But on the other hand, there's this tremendous sense of pride that I'm a part of one of the more sacred things in our society. I'm a part that's more my like nationalistic, emotional, idealistic side. That's connecting
Mm-hmm.
to my values and to those families. And then there's more my personal side, specifically October 7th, but even before that, reaching, coming to visit a family before the holidays, which is what I did before. And some of these families were families that lost their loved one in the Six-Day War or the Yom Kippur War. Like we're not talking
Mm-hmm.
only about, stories from the 90s or the 21st century. And you come into a home like that and you see how real, how live that pain is still so raw 40, 50
Mm-hmm.
years later. And I'm there and they feel that the army came and didn't forget my son, didn't forget my brother,
Mm-hmm.
didn't forget my sister, that my family member still matters to the army. They've never forgotten. And to know that I was a part of that and to sit there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 40 minutes, depending on, what was appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to hear the stories, it gives the family an opportunity. Sometimes they don't want to share it frequently. It's too painful. But if the army's coming, they want to share it. It's their opportunity to remember and to connect. And I'm that person. I'm no one special. There's nothing special about me. They didn't send me because I know how to do it so amazing. They sent me as a
Right.
representative who's coming in. Not a, by the way, it's not a position that you need to be a mental health professional to do. It helps,
Mm-hmm.
certain skills that you learn through the profession, but it's really just about being kind, respectful, and and listening, just being a good listener. It's very, very meaningful to me.
Wow. Okay. So I want to just touch on any experiences you had with wounded warriors, as opposed to the families of the people who have been killed, or have died in the wars. Can you maybe share a story or two from that side of your experience?
Yeah, sure. Um, well, one story I'm thinking of is really it's a common. I guess they're intertwined. I'm thinking of the inspiration of meeting someone who's Pugu. She has a head injury and disabled, 100% disability. A guy who was in Lebanon in the 90s, in San Khanin, paratrooper, and in a specific battle, he was injured, and his friends moved on. Now, he did get married. He does have children. He was able to create a new life for himself. But he's, in some ways, he's still a little stuck there. He's
Hmm.
still arguing and about the politics of that time. He's still angry at the politicians of those in those years.
Hmm.
There's that emotional place that feels like that was um, a tragic stop in his life.
Hmm.
That you don't forget. That's one part of it. The other part is the ability to rebuild. He's a professional runner, Ironman. He could barely see. He has to have a friend run with him so he can run. But he's like an ultra marathon runner. I mean, it's amazing. And
Wow.
and this is a guy who's got a head injury and and he's difficulty with vision. He's an artist. He does exhibitions and he's it's I don't know if it's due to the head injury, but I think it might be. He's a little impulsive and he doesn't screen what he says so well. He doesn't filter. Sorry if it's a word. Doesn't filter it
That's
so well.
right.
So,
Yeah.
but it became a new strength. Now I don't know if he always had it or not. But if he wants something, he calls anyone. He'll say anything on his mind, and he gets things done. And it's so inspiring to see how, with all the difficulties, he's been able to create a new life for himself, a very meaningful life. Another guy, similar story in the sense that he too had to fight the system at first. It's a little different. They didn't believe him that he's 100% injured and he needs disability and support, financial support, and whatever else
Hmm.
Mishrad B'Tichon can offer. He had to fight for a few years till he got recognition,
Hmm.
and he's now on the fencing team, the Paralympic fencing team in Israel.
Wow.
I don't know if he made it to the Olympics or not, but this was
Hmm.
something that he started doing. Someone noticed him, noticed that he's athletic. He's
Hmm.
uh, he's a really sweet, kind guy. He's from the Ethiopian community, very
Hmm.
athletic guy before, was in a combat unit, tremendous pride in his unit and in his army service. And he didn't even know anything about fencing. There's this Russian trainer who, came from a culture that taught fencing professionally and said,
Hmm.
you know what, I see you got this good arm strength and I think you could pull this off. I think he found him swimming. I think he saw him swimming and said, I want to give you a chance to train in fencing. It rose the ranks in European competitions. He's gone a few times and was even successful a few times. Is
Hmm.
really inspiring how people can have that breaking point, but not fall, not drown in that. It's not a given. It's really not a given. And I'm sure they did drown at points. It doesn't mean that there aren't moments. There's no doubt in my mind, but that was really inspiring. And those were my first families that I worked with. Only afterwards did I get families of bereaved soldiers.
Hmm.
So that was my introduction. You also asked about the difference between the two, right?
Yeah, what's the difference? What like how does it feel to be working with someone? I mean, essentially, right? You're working with someone who's alive, a wounded warrior who's alive, and now dealing with the Defense Department and this huge change in their life
Yeah,
of who they are and what their purpose may be and their capabilities as a disabled, wounded warrior myself. I know what they go through. It's not but it's very different when you're talking about uh, a family of the bereaved, like, or a bereaved
100%.
family. So,
I'll,
can
I'll,
you sort of tell me where that experience?
yeah, yeah. I'd like to start from my perspective, my experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely the family's experience, which is very different. One of the things I've noticed throughout this year, I noticed it this year less than in the past. I think because the relationship is so much deeper this year because it was so intensive. It's not just a visit once a year, once every other, or before holidays, twice a year. And even so, sometimes they change the list on me. It's the army sometimes trying to rearrange and reorganize and restructure.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't even be with the same person, ongoing for years. Where now in the war, it's been more intensive. But where I'm going with this is that I almost feel like I'm a family member of this family that I'm working with. I feel so close to them and I feel so connected. And I hear so many stories about the fallen soldier that I feel like I know him, but I've never met him because I was only introduced to this family after.
After the fact. Yeah.
So I don't know this family the way they were the week before. The way they were the week before is a totally different picture. I see them bereaved in a bereaved state, telling stories about someone that I feel a strong connection to, but I'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to visiting, a wounded veteran, here's the person himself. I get to meet the hero personally. I get to build a connection, develop a connection, forge a meaningful connection with the soldier himself. There isn't this like ghost in the room, that I feel is there but isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
This person's there, and I think that's one difference that I found is powerful. I'll also say something about what I see in common. I also find that everyone's so different in the way they cope with such a tragic experience. And each family has its family members that cope differently, and the family is a unit that copes differently than a different family. But what I do find in common between both wounded veterans and bereaved families is that they all are so different, but the patterns are the same, right? There are some people who are so angry at the army, and a lot of times it has to do with what happened, what the story was. Was it neglect? Was there something in the like the scandal of October 7th? There's tremendous anger and the chaos that happened afterwards, but that's a unique story in itself because there's so many cases that didn't happen during a war that are scandalous, but there was something chaotic about that one. So that has its own place where people don't know what happened to their child for days, and they don't know when the burial is going to take place. They don't know like that, and no one knows who to talk to about what, and there was such chaos in the army.
Right. But since then, I feel things have moved towards a place of being more organized, and yet still much hugely impactful.
Yeah, 100%. That first week was chaotic for everyone, and the army tried to, what do they say, lick its wounds, and pick itself up, and right away, within hours, have everyone ready to start doing their work. That happened right away. But it was chaotic. It was chaotic because no one was really prepared for the. But you're right. The work is extremely impactful and extremely meaningful. But what is in common? I was giving one example of anger, but there's also the example of tremendous appreciation for the army, and I think it's because they have a casualty officer that comes in that represents them, that they feel they have a voice. And that could be true for injured, for wounded veterans too. If they feel they have a voice, they feel that the army sees them after they're wounded, then that too impacts on their experience. It's a tremendous impact. Do I feel the army, I sacrificed for the army, or my family member sacrificed for the army, and the army saw me and recognized that, acknowledged it, then I feel a sense of pride that I'm a part of that. And some are angry and hurt. Some get stuck in the past and they can't move on. They really just can't. They can't be blamed for it either. They really just can't. And you could be, a wounded veteran. You could be a bereaved family. It doesn't matter. It's the combination of the consequences of your story, of the incident, together with your life story, but had nothing to do with the incident. Everything that came before and everything that came after. Just don't, the conditions are so different between people.
Interesting. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
I find that so interesting. Like, as a disabled veteran, as someone who's gone through this, my own story is actually very much of this vein, right? I was in a commando unit. I was in Maglan. I got hurt during a training exercise. I tore 2 ligaments in my right ankle. I continued for 11 months after I got hurt. Went and had surgery. The doctor said, you'll be fine. You'll be running in 6 months. 6 months later, I get diagnosed with a chronic pain disorder that spreads. It starts with my right foot, and I basically get told, you're not going to be in the Army anymore. And my casualty officer comes and helps me fill out some paperwork to be recognized by the Defense Department. And that's the last time I see her. And nobody from my team knows, because I had already left my team after that. At some point during the middle, between the first injury and the 11-month point of the surgery, I dropped from my team. So nobody from my team knew that I was going through surgery. And for almost 20 years, I had no connection to my unit. And I had this huge weight of being embarrassed about what happened to me, about being, feeling like I was a failure because I hadn't finished my maslul and I hadn't become an officer like I wanted. Like, all those things hadn't happened. And it was actually a casualty officer who also was the mechanism for changing all that for me, because over the years, casualty officers would call like every 3 or 4 years to say, "Hi, I'm leaving. I want you to meet the person who's switching me." And that was like a 20-minute conversation. They might come to the house, and that was it. But in 2021, my casualty officer reached out because she had to give me Ot Levanon. And I was a little bit like, I don't want it, because I didn't, like, for me, like, getting a pin that says you participated in something, especially since I'd been 2 weeks and it was kind of really after the war, there's like a whole fuzziness to why I'm getting, like, why am I getting this exactly? And for me, it represents someone who's a hero, and I don't see myself in that light at all. I didn't see myself in the light, even though, I had this great connection to the Army, like, in my heart, even when after I got hurt. If you would come and visit in my apartment, you would have seen there was like this whole like shelf of Army paraphernalia and stuff with my beret and then all kinds of other stuff. And I had that connection, but I wasn't connected. And so when she brings me this pen, she basically says, "So what's your story? Like, what's the deal? Why don't you want this? And you obviously are not Israeli. You have an accent when you speak Hebrew." So I told her that I hadn't been in touch with anyone and everything else. And she looked me dead in the eye and she goes, "David, I'm going to change that." And I got to say, I believed her about this much. like, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then like a month and a half later, she calls me and says that they're doing a celebration for 35 years for the unit, and she wants me to come. And I didn't want to go. I was like, I really, really, really didn't want to go. And my wife was like, "David, I want to go see where you were. I want to go see the base. Let's go." And she pushed me. And we went. And it was immensely like overwhelming for me to walk through the gate. Like rolling through the gate in my chair and being like, oh boy, there's the clinic where like the doctor who told me that I had to go home before I went on a mission, and there was my office, and they took down the rope we had to climb before you could go into the cafeteria to eat. They took it down. I was like, "Where's the rope?" And I'm rolling around there, and as I'm rolling around, I see a former commander, a former person who's like one of the people who was actually the commander of the unit, who was there when I was there, and I was able to, reminisce with him a little bit. And then as I'm rolling, I see this officer with two falafel, two maple leaves on his shoulder, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, "What? No wait!" And like all of a sudden it clicked, and we were on this was one of the guys from my Tzevet, and it was one of the guys I was closest with on my team, and like my whole world went from being no connection at all to I started having coffee with him, and then I started having coffee with he connected me with another guy who connected me with another guy, and now I'm in the team's WhatsApp group, and like my whole world went from one to the other, and it was really because of the casualty officer. And like it didn't even stop there, because a month later she called me and she was like, "David, I want you to come to the commando school and tell your story." I'm like, "What story?" She's like, "Just tell the story you told me." And I told my story there. And I, at some point during it, I'd said, I didn't finish the course. I never got the pin to say I'm Maglan, da da da. And near the end of my talk, one of the officers gets up and walks out, and I don't like I'm like, as it is, I still am carrying this weight of like, I'm a failure, I'm not a gibor, I'm not like a hero, anything. And the commander of the school gets up and tells me, today this kind of thing never happens. We make sure that we're with our soldiers, especially our lone soldiers, because I was a lone soldier. If one of them gets hurt, we make sure that we're visiting them all the time. Doesn't matter whether it's in training or it's whatever. And then he's waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, we're waiting for something. And then this officer comes back in, puts his hand out, hands something to the commander, and goes and sits down. And the commander of the school turns to me and he says, David, the bravery and courage that you show every single day dealing with your disability, and the fact that you are willing to do all the things you've done since you got hurt, which I had never seen through that lens of courage. I'd always seen it as just dealing with whatever I had to deal with to be able to be better in my life, like have my life be a little bit better. He goes, the Mafkats, the commander of the team that's training to be Maglan, wants you to know that what you go through every day and the bravery and courage you demonstrate every single day is much harder than anyone who has to go through training. And then he gives me the pin that he went and got from his A uniform, from his formal uniform. He went and got the pin, pulled it off, and I was ready to cry. And from there, I started giving talks in the army. And now, I mean, I'm jealous of you that you're in Middleman, but like, I'm dying to get into Middleman. And I finally signed on the papers to do it. Like, and I'm like, I don't care if I'm a jobnik. I just want to put on a uniform again. Would I like to be out fighting? Yes. Am I good at what I do with a gun? Yes, I am. I'm very good at it. I do competitive shooting, but I don't care. Just give me a uniform and tell me, David, go teach leadership, go teach strategy. Like, I don't care. Give me something.
Yeah.
So I totally, like the worth of the casualty officer can have, like the impact they can have on a soldier is so immense I think both for good and for bad. So I think it's really interesting that like we think about what it means for a disabled veteran to have to go through this. Now you're a clinical social worker, which means that you have to also deal with people who have disabilities. Like that's part of what it is you do. I'm curious if you could maybe like let's take a small dive into that area of your life of like what does it mean to deal or help people who have a disability and need to. I'm going to use the word accept, but I hate that word because I haven't accepted it yet. And most of the people I know who are wounded warriors, while they may say they've accepted it, they've accepted it begrudgingly and with a sense of, okay, this is life, I have to live it. But what is it? Like, how does it come from your perspective? And how do you put that into play? Or how do you, I know that you're not putting into play right now, but how do you see other casualty officers sort of putting some of that experience into play?
I think we are given chances to do amazing things, and sometimes we don't know it. Like sometimes we don't realize the impact we can have. And sometimes it's clear, it's right in front of us, like, wow, if I connect David to his unit, that's going to be very meaningful for David. Sometimes it's so clear. Mm-hmm. Usually it's not that clear. Like I'm thinking of a family they were extremely suspicious of me. I'm representing the army, I'm coming in, I'm working with them, and who's this guy? He's part of the system that failed us, right? Mm-hmm. And my job now is to be a professional, to hear them out, and to try to help with whatever I can help. And they're, well, what happened with this and what happened with that and why is this happening? What's that? And they're blaming me and they're blaming the system and they're angry and to just go there and listen and show them that their anger is acceptable and that I can tolerate it. I'm not going to break. And I'm going to hear it. I'm going to contain it as much as I can, best I can. I'm sure they noticed sometimes that I was sitting in my chair uncomfortably and I felt a little overwhelmed or I felt a little nervous and I didn't know if I can do my job well. And sometimes I was more confident, but in the end, in the bigger picture, in the bigger scheme of things, they saw that I didn't give up They saw that they mattered to me. Even if I didn't always know how to do the things right, and even if sometimes I misunderstood what exactly they were trying to get from the army or from me, but the commitment to the family and to trying to help them and be there for them any way I can, help them feel that this is a guy they can trust, this the army, and I'm a part. I'm seen as a piece of the army, right? I'm an individual, but I'm also representing the army. And if I'm successful, the army was successful. If I'm successful, I feel safe with the army, and the army respects me and cares about me. So that's one example of how to deal with that, and things I've been up against. There's also situations where that didn't happen, where I tried to be supportive, but they didn't let me in. And they didn't let me in maybe because I wasn't as supportive as I was trying to be. Maybe I made mistakes. I'm sure I have. Maybe also because the anger was too great, and they can't let go of that, and I don't expect them to. So I'm just going to continue to visit and continue to respect, continue to do my best, and maybe that anger will stay. And that's something that I do hope they can get help with, because, and I'll also try to be supportive there, but it's just very debilitating. It's very hard to stay in that pain. And when you talked about acceptance, one of the hardest things about acceptance is that you don't really accept, right? Like, what does it mean to accept? It's okay. It's okay that someone's disabled or someone lost a loved one. How do you accept that? How do you really accept that? And one in my new job, you mentioned that the southern branch that I work at for Beit Daniela, which is for teens, teens dealing with mental health issues. It's a daycare program. It's a Merkaz Tipul Yom, which is the equivalent of psychiatric care, daycare and a psychiatric facility for teens.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some really hard cases there with people with suicidality, suicidal ideation, and self-harm, and others. And one of the tools that we use, DPT, is a therapeutic approach that talks about, it combines a bunch of different approaches, but the point I'm trying to get to is a concept called radical acceptance, which, when someone's in tremendous pain and they want to die, they're in so much pain, they literally want to take their lives because they're in so much pain. You can't tell them, accept the pain. That doesn't work, right? You can never tell someone after they've lost someone, well, be positive. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Right.
We start by validating their pain and acknowledging their pain and staying with them in the pain. You stay there first. When they're ready, you never know how long it's going to be. When they're ready to talk and think about radical acceptance, that's a very powerful tool. Radical acceptance, the reason it's called radical acceptance is because it's radical, because it doesn't make sense to accept it. It doesn't make sense. And the only way you could accept it is if you accept that I'm accepting something unacceptable, that I really don't have to accept this, that my anger or my resentment or my pain is so unacceptable, and I know that, and I've accepted that.
Look, I suffer from a chronic pain disorder. It's considered the worst pain disorder on the face of the planet. It started in my right foot, went up to my right leg, moved to my left foot and left leg very quickly. Once it started spreading to my left leg, like touch, rain, wind, all hurt. And it's this like burning pain. And I hear you talking about pain this way, this idea of radical acceptance, and it's very different than any therapy I've ever gone through. Where people have talked with me about, my psychologists have talked to me about acceptance, or just moving beyond and living life. But there was no sense of like, it's okay that you're in pain, right? I don't think anyone has ever said radical acceptance is never. No, I don't remember anyone ever using that term. I don't remember anyone ever saying, David, it's okay for you to say that my pain is not okay and live in that realm for a while and then try and figure out how to be okay with that realm. Which is very, very interesting. I think it's very different than anything I've ever heard. It almost makes me want to try it. Although the idea of going down into that pain, into my pain, and staying there is extremely scary.
Yeah.
Like, that's a scary, scary thought.
I mean, what everyone wants to do is avoid pain. That's the human condition, right? We do everything in our power to think about it. Technology, investment, every investment probably in the world ever is to reduce pain, right? It's to reduce discomfort.
Right.
It's to make our lives more pleasant. And then here comes a therapy approach that says, stay with the pain. And that sounds crazy. That sounds crazy. But mindfulness, one of the, which is also, it's, the Far East, meditation was kind of reintroduced as a therapeutic intervention. And one of the powerful things about it is the ability to observe your pain with and embrace your pain and have a relationship with your pain that's different than the running away from your pain.
Right. Which I find myself doing a lot. Like, I'll go start doing work when my legs are in more pain just to distract myself from the pain.
Right.
My body will crash on me to the point, like, I'll push myself, where my body is screaming at me, but I will say, no, I need to push through. I need to be present. And what will happen is I'll get to the point where my body goes, nope, you're done. And then I go to bed, and my wife will tell me, she'll say, David, I could put a red alert on high volume next to your ear, and you're not going to wake up from this. That's how, like, gone you are at that point. I actually like using Dungeons and Dragons as, like, the metaphor for it. In Dungeons and Dragons, you got hit points, and you got something called exhaustion points. And a really great game master will connect the two, where, like, the more you live in the realm of not having a full amount of hit points because you didn't rest or because you are constantly hurt, your exhaustion points start going down. So you start responding badly, and then you start taking actions and you're not doing them as well as you should. And then your movement gets slowed down, and then you're stuck and you can't really move, and then you're dead.
Yeah.
That's how my life goes. Like, I feel like I'm living that life. And it's interesting to say, wait a second, maybe there's worth in saying, don't run away. Be in the pain. Know that the pain is real. Accept that the pain is real. Just accept that it's real. It's not accept that it's okay. It's not accept that it's right. It's a very different way of thinking about, just accept that it's real. It's there. Which I think is another thing that a lot of disabled veterans, especially the ones who have something like PTSD, face, is that it's not visible. Like, I can't show someone my CRPS, the pain. I can show them what it does to my skin. I can show them what it does to my feet in terms of swelling, but they can't see the amount of pain and energy and everything else. And someone who has PTSD, and I also have, like, I don't have PTSD. My wife tends to think I do, but I'm not diagnosed with PTSD. But the people with PTSD, they look healthy, for the most part. They look healthy. And then you go, wait a second. They have an invisible disability from the Army. And that's huge. And I think that idea of living in that moment and saying, wait a second, no, I do have a disability. I do have something wrong with me. And it's okay for me to say something's wrong.
Yeah.
He's so super important. And I think that's something that's changed more recently, especially for PTSD.
Yeah.
Here in Israel.
I'd like to add to that point. When we tell people to accept something, we're actually telling them to shut up and stop complaining, right? So that means we're not really telling them to accept, and that's what they're telling themselves. Accept it already, just stop whining. But that's the opposite of accepting it, because if you're really accepting it, then you're accepting the pain that comes with it. You're accepting the frustration and resentment and the fact that you don't accept it. That's part of the acceptance. And that's so hard to do. And no one talks like that. And it's not the way we talk in a community. We want everyone to just, that's the way we're taught as children, right? If you're crying in the supermarket because your candy fell on the floor or because you want some chocolate, your mother to buy you chocolate, you cry, your mother teaches you that behavior is not acceptable. Your emotions are bothering us. Mm-hmm. And then we slowly, and it's not a bad thing to teach, because we do need to learn to control our emotions. So if I'm angry in the kindergarten, whatever, and I slap a kid because I'm angry now and I'm hurt and I'm upset, he upset me. So we're taught, no, you don't hit. Take your anger and put it in a drawer. It's
emotional regulation.
Right, but we're really, the way we're taught emotional regulation, and it makes sense that there really isn't. There is another way to teach it, but it's not realistic, and it's very hard to do. Is the real way is we tell people, suck it up, shove it in a drawer. Don't express what you feel. Don't be in touch with what you feel. It's bothering you. And then when we need to deal with complex emotions, sometimes that doesn't work anymore. It helped us cope as a little kid to kind of suck up our emotions. But really what we want to do is we want to say, you're really angry now. You want to slap that kid, and I get it. He really upset you. But you can't slap him. You got to hold that in. That's not easy. You want to teach regulation with acknowledgement of the pain, the hurt. And we don't do that. We teach people to shut it up. And then what happens is we ask them to accept their emotions, and they're like, what emotions? They're in a drawer. I already shut them up. Or emotions are totally out of control because I can't hold it in the drawer anymore. It's really tough.
Right. I'm curious how has that come to play with being a casualty officer? So I gotta imagine that where you're touching is such a raw place emotionally that even contemplating, like I can't even contemplate walking into a bereaved family's house or walking up to a disabled veteran who is freshly disabled, because like you're dealing, generally the casualty officers deal with the disabled veterans either right at the beginning or in like little meetings along the way. But like the primary spot where they meet is like if it's in the hospital or it's just after they've been hurt. And saying to them, suck it up. You're going to be great. You're going to be fine. Like, I don't think that's how we do this.
No. So, we're taught not to do that. But there's my training as a casualty officer, and then there's my training as a mental health professional. And I've seen my casualty officer in action. My lieutenant, my officer who's in charge of me. I've seen her work with families too, and with casualties, and you see that she doesn't have the mental health training, but you see that she gets it. They learn how to acknowledge the pain and to not try to tell people to change it. They don't try to convince people that they're over exaggerating or anything like that. In fact, when I spoke in the beginning of our meeting about how the casualties and their families are sacred in Israeli society, that is how they're treated by everyone that I've ever seen work with a bereaved family or a wounded veteran. The approach is whatever they ask for, anything they ask for, we're going to try to help. Literally anything. Now, realistically, that's not possible. So practically, that's not possible. But the attitude is whatever they ask, we're going to look into. And it's because of that. It's because you don't say no to a wounded veteran or a bereaved.
It's so interesting because my experience is slightly different, but it goes back to that period when I wasn't so much in touch with my casualty officers, where it would be like once every 3 years someone would stop by and say hi, and I'd be like, listen, I would love to get back into the Army. I'd love to be working with the Army. I teach in university strategy and leadership. Is there some way you can help me? And it was like, well, we don't know. We'll figure it out. But it wasn't done to be mean. It was just like, this is so outside the purview of what
Right.
what I can even think about doing. That like I don't like there was no sense of yes. There was more of a sense of I
Right.
don't
They're
know.
basically not saying no because they don't want to say no, but they already know
Right,
the answer is no.
right,
It's as a result of lack of creativity or the feeling that since this is so unlikely to work out, I'm not going to put the time into it. Um,
right.
right. But either way, the attitude is you don't say no,
Mm,
and we are expected to look into it. We are even if
right,
it's because maybe, right? Like maybe I could
right,
connect him with his old unit.
right.
Maybe I could connect him to some person that is in charge of lectures in the army. Maybe.
So what happened with me? That's what happened with me, but it only happened much later, where suddenly I had I think it's also part of how the casualty officer's role has changed over the last 20 years. Is that casualty officers, even before October 7th, I think if we go back 2020, 2019, 2021, their role, the way they connected with the soldiers, the disabled veterans, the wounded warriors, changed drastically. I think they were much more connected to them. I was getting phone calls much more often, for instance, even before like I was already getting like a phone call or two along the way. Um, and I also think that part of it is that the generation has changed. Like the idea now for, I mean, most of the officers who we deal with, you know, they're that I deal with, they're either second lieutenants, first lieutenants, or captains. And all of them are of a generation where, like, I mean, the oldest one is what, 23, 24, right? I'm 47 years old. um, they're of a generation where the idea that you can actually try to do something different is there. Like, yeah, let's see what we can do. Like, you know, almost like the sky's the limit.
Also, the networking today, in 3 clicks, you reach anyone in the country, right? Like
Right.
LinkedIn, kind
Yeah.
of LinkedIn networking style.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
amazing. I know someone who knows someone isn't the way it was in the 80s or the 90s.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of it. I also think that part of it is
Yeah.
someone has to want to take it on. And I think that what happened here, for instance, for me, which was huge, was I got connected to the education officer at the commando school, and just recently, like it was what, um, 6 months ago, I finally like really made that connection with them, and I sat down with her and I said, "Listen, I'm going to share with you my dream. I wanted to be an officer in the army. That didn't happen. I would love to get back into Middleman. Here's what I do." And she's like, "I have absolutely have need for you. Like I can imagine you coming in 3 or 4 times every session, every cycle, to teach leadership and to work with the guys on understanding both tactics and strategy." And she's like, I and she took it out. She's, "I'm gonna take care of this. I'm gonna change this." And it was the same thing with Noah. It was the I statement. "I'm gonna change this." And I think that that takes a great deal of courage on the part of the casualty officer and on the part of the education officer, in my case, who's taking it on, is to take on that I statement. It takes a huge amount of courage to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about what kind of talk there is kind of between the different casualty officers, because some of you guys are in Miluim and some of you guys are already past, like they're officers, but they're past their original, service time, but they're still in the army, what we call Keva. And then there's also like there are people who work as what's called a mashak or a mashakit, which it means that they're in the army right now during their regular service time. They're 2 or 3 years that they have to serve, and their focus is still working with the wounded warriors and with the families of the bereaved families. What kind of talk goes on between you guys? What are the main things you guys end up, besides the friendly "Hey, how y'all doing"? What kind of stuff gets talked about?
Very interesting question. Um, I don't know where to start because just like any workplace or any group of people that gather, you could talk about anything, right? So,
Right. Right.
so it's like, okay, but that's not what you're asking, right?
No, that's not what I'm asking.
You're asking specifically, what are the unique conversations that this unique group would have?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, what are the unique questions? Because when you're in it, you're not looking at it like an outsider, right? You're in
Right.
it. You don't really
But I'm an outsider.
exactly, but you're asking an insider to answer the question. Um, so a few things. Number one, the camaraderie is wonderful. Like, you can have high ranking officers and mashakim, like you said, and everyone just is working together. There's obviously a hierarchy, there's a hierarchy, but because it's a field where the practically mental health professionals, um, the atmosphere is very accepting, very supportive. It's almost like my workplace, where you have a bunch of people always thinking about your needs,
Mm-hmm.
which is really interesting. With that said, there's a culture there of working 24/7. They like 2 a.m. you can get a message from someone, and then 6 a.m. they're up again, and they're not eating, they're not sleeping. Talk about self-care. It's terrible there.
Right.
But the conversations, there's tremendous. There's a really tricky. I'll just share one thing, which is really, really tricky.
Okay.
And it's when no one wants a new case, but everyone wants a new case, right? You're so relieved when people are healthy and nothing happened. There was an explosion, and you find out that no injuries or minor injuries. There's nothing really to follow up on. It's a tremendous relief, but at the same time, that's not our job. We only work when there's something to do, and when there's something to do means that something bad happened. And there's
Bad
this
things happen.
extremely ambivalent, confusing emotion that surfaces for all of us, where on the one hand you're like, damn it, another injured or another killed soldier, and it hits a core, and you're so angry and you're so hurt, and at the same time you're like, but this is going to be the new family I work with, or the new injured person. You're already looking forward to the task you got because of the thing that hurts you so much. It's a very confusing position to be in. So that's something that everyone's kind of playing this weird game when we talk about it, because no one's going to show the side of it that is looking forward to the new task. You don't want to even make it. We spoke about suppressing certain emotions, That's the emotion you want to suppress because it's such a tragedy, and you want to focus on the tragedy. But at the same time, I know that there's about to be a new bond, and there's about to be a new connection, and there's someone that I'm going to be there for, and this is what I signed up for. It's like going to war. A soldier never wants to go to war, but boy, does he want to go to war. He finally gets to carry out his training.
Yeah. But it's not just. I don't think it's just carrying out your training. It's almost like it gives you. It is your purpose statement, right?
It's your purpose.
Think about.
I like that. That's true.
What it is, like the moment you put on the uniform and you put on your kumta and you go, I'm putting this strap on, and that strap is the strap for the casualty officer, and you go, I am now, my purpose, my entire being is set up for, with externally and internally, taking care of the wounded warriors and taking care of bereaved families. And when that purpose isn't being fulfilled, it's like, well,
what am I doing?
What am I doing? Why am I doing this? But then when it happens, you go, oh, wackadoo, this is not good. I can't, and there's this conflict, this very much this conflict. I totally get it. I'm curious. Okay, so you spoke about hierarchy, and I'm curious how leadership and followership kind of plays a role in dealing with, for instance, that emotion, right? Like, what is how, I want to talk about personal leadership and personal followership, and then maybe even in the group that you're as a group. How do you guys express that through leadership and followership?
Well, I'll talk about when you get assigned a new family,
Mm-hmm.
and you're really relying on, specifically in my case, because of the war. So what happens is the Ramadit, who is the actual official casualty officer for a certain unit, and by the way, I'm a casualty officer in the commando, which is close to your heart. Although I've only worked with Egos, it's still related.
I'll forgive you. We'll be fine.
And בית ספר לקומנדו. Egos.
Also, they are very close to my heart.
Right.
So
Right. So you're assigned a family, and as a follower, because I was the bottom of the hierarchy chain, where I got, not exactly, but I didn't have, I wasn't anyone else's superior. So, so I was at the bottom of that. But there were other people who, but in any case, the point is that my officer is someone I have to rely on. It's someone that I have to trust. I'm going into this extremely sensitive situation. I want to know the backstory. I want to know what they need from me. If I turn to her with a request from them, I want to know she's looking into it. If she's not looking into it, I'm going to have this confused situation, which happened to me a few times, where I didn't know how seriously she was taking me. I was speaking to a family. They were upset about something. They wanted something addressed. I turned to my officer and I update her, and she says she's on it, but she keeps getting back to me without with no development, or she's not getting back to me, and then I call her and she's
right.
development, and then I don't know, is she taking me seriously? Is she not taking me seriously? I have to be able to trust her that she's doing her maximum to help me do my maximum, and that was always a major issue, and I had no way of knowing if she was really doing her best, and the families I was working with had no way of knowing if I was doing my best, and there was always this sensitive, complex relationship where it took me time to get to know her and trust her, build that trust, to see that, yeah, she's really trying. I do need a chaser. I do need a reminder. Talk about the follower being an effective follower. I think I would say that I did need to know when I could trust that this is 100% on my officer, but at the same time know that she's got a lot on her plate, and if I want my issues to be a priority, I have to bring them up. I have to address them. I have to remind her, not because she's neglecting, because she's got a lot on her plate. Right. Another thing was coherently, clearly explaining what the needs are. If I just say, oh, the family needs A, and she's like, oh, okay, well, I'll look into it, but she doesn't know that they need it yesterday. This is a big deal. This is extremely sensitive. Then it's on the back burner for her, right? But so then I really needed to be good at expressing the need and the importance and what's behind it. And that was part of me and her to also ask me those questions, so tell me more. Tell me more about what is it that they need.
Right. I think it's interesting. I think that casualty officers have, whether they're dealing with the wounded warriors or they're dealing with the bereaved families, have this really unique position where they are acting both in followership of the army and of their officer, presenting, especially when they are not the actual officer, but like you, as a reserve officer, you are essentially acting in view of the actual officer. And you need to essentially represent her to the best of your ability, but at the same time, you have to be able to bring to her and be the funnel of communication and really pass on that information as effectively as possible to her so that she can maximize what she can do both for you and for the families that you represent, whether it's the wounded warrior who needs help or it's the bereaved family who needs something. And I think that because it's not even just that, because she also acts as almost like a channel further into the army to get what you need either from the army or from the defense department or from whatever it is, whatever organization it is that you need stuff from. And so it's very functionally, the role of casualty officer here is super impactful, but at the same time, it's very it's a very tricky
Yeah, yeah.
At least to be.
I'll say that it's like a chain, right? And we're all but I'm just one link in a chain, and you got
Hmm.
this long stretch of a hierarchy that in any big bureaucratic system it's like this. That's why everyone hates
Hmm.
bureaucracy, because all you need is one link to not work effectively, and the whole chain isn't effective.
The whole system breaks down.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And then when people feel neglected and not cared for, it could be that 100 people are working on this, but one link isn't effective, and it's not working.
Wow.
Now that's
Okay.
that's
Um.
extreme. That's extreme because obviously if
Okay.
that link isn't working, then I could bypass it. I can complain about it. I can speak to like but yeah, that's still true. That still does make it very difficult.
Right. Right. Um. As much as I want to continue this conversation because it's awesome, I feel like we need to come to an end. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about or raise about your experience as a casualty officer, being in the army? What the topic, as I declared it, was the heart of service. Is there anything that you'd like to just bring to help
Yeah, sure.
bring this to
I think I want to say something about something we spoke about the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm torn right now. I'm actually in the process of leaving my reserve duty because I have a full-time job in this branch down south, and we're growing. Beit Daniela founded a new branch in the Otef Gaza area near Netivot, working with these teens, and I'm managing this new branch, and it requires of me tremendous resources of time and energy and availability, and I can't do
Mm-hmm.
both. And it's taken me months to accept this because there is that pride. I'm in uniform. I don't want to strip myself of these uniforms. I really want to be a part of it. At the same time, once you're on uniform, all you want to do is get off uniform. That's also kind of true. But that's
Mm-hmm.
the technical side of just like the burnout of a demanding position. But there's definitely that side of me that says I, I'm going to really miss this. I'm going to lose this connection. It's part of my identity, right? You spoke about your identity as a Maglan soldier, and you've never ever lost that piece. You're still a
Nope.
Maglan soldier,
Oh yeah.
100%. Right, right. And that's why you want uniform. It's You have a relationship with Maglan, but you also have a relationship with the IDF that says,
Mm-hmm.
and with the state of Israel that says, I want to be a part of that. And
Mm-hmm.
right now, I'm very conflicted. I feel like I'm much more impactful as a manager
Yeah.
of a mental health program. And
Especially one down south where there's.
right, that's also part of it. But if I ask where am I more needed, I'm 100% more needed down south in my job. But
Mhm.
but then I got to let go of a piece of my identity that's very important to me that I've been involved in since October 9th, and since 13 years ago, that I don't want to let go of. And it took a while till I realized that I'm not doing my job well and it's just not fair anymore. I have to
Mhm.
job also in the military, my availability to
Right.
be the best I can be at my work. So as a casualty officer, so I had to make the decision to say, so I'm on uniform today because tonight I'm going to meet a family and say goodbye. And the person that's replacing me is coming in. He's coming to the meeting with
Wow.
me, and it's really hard for me to do. So just to talk about what it's like to that relationship we have with the IDF and the relationship we have with the state of Israel, and where are we in all of that? Am I a part of it? Am I not? I think you mentioned that earlier,
Yeah.
and it resonated.
Yeah. I think that for me, there's two parts to it. First of all, I'm dying to get back into the army and back into uniform. I'm doing everything I can to do that. But for instance, I yesterday I gave a talk to one of the intelligence units. Um, and I saw, I'm dealing with these soldiers, and I look at them, and they're all in uniform, and I'm looking at them, and I'm going, "You're writing our story. Each and every one of you is helping to write the story of the Jewish people today." Right? It's not like the story ended when, the Torah ended. Like, we are writing this story every single moment, and you are you're an integral part of you right now in uniform are playing an integral role in writing that story. Even, I don't want to say even, as a casualty officer, not even as but as a casualty officer, you are intimately writing that story.
Yeah.
And to give that up, to say, I'm not going to do this anymore because there's something else I can do for Israel, for the Jewish people, but the way it feels is, I think, so impactful the moment you're putting on a uniform. And there really is a heart to service, which is very different when you are part of an organization like the IDF versus Beit Daniela. Not because Beit Daniela isn't super important. It is. But because the nature of being part of the organization is such that the impact is, it feels like even your small impact is almost amplified simply because you're wearing the same uniform as the soldier who's up north and the soldier who's in Gaza and the soldier who got wounded. I think that's...
Yeah. I totally agree. And I had to make a calculated decision that said, put that emotion aside. And we spoke about that.
Yeah, it's hard.
The desire to be a part of that is very strong. But there's something more important right now than my desire to be a part of that. And I had to choose, what I thought was right. But yeah, definitely. I understand what you're saying.
I think that's very much the heart of service. Okay.
Thank you
very, very much, Akiva. This has been phenomenal. Thank you for joining us in the Doctor's Den. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hope to see you next time.